So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back after lunch. So, the session we're going to look at just now is one of the most fundamental challenges facing both the public and private sector, companies that are big and small. The way that we work and the way that we will be working in the future and how we can best prepare our workforces for those changes. Now, school children now are frequently being told at school that many, if not most, of the jobs that they will end up doing do not exist today whilst they're actually studying, which is a pretty frightening thought if you think about it. So how do we corral the existing talent into new jobs, new ways of working, and how do we view it as a blessing rather than a curse? So today we're lucky to have with us to discuss this, not particularly in this order, so apologies if I slightly confuse. But on my left, we have Mamuka Bakhtadze, the Prime Minister of Georgia and a young global leader. Next, we have Minister Falasi, who is Minister of State for Higher Education and Advanced Skills in the United Arab Emirates. And apologies, I'm actually checking who's sitting where. Jahanzaib Ansari, who is co-founder and chief executive of Knockri, and Anita Woolley, who is associate professor of organizational behaviour and theory at Carnegie Mellon University. And at the far end, we have Alain Dehaze, chief executive of Adecco Group. So let's kick off with looking at just what are the big changes that we all see coming down the line. Now, according to the Future of Jobs report, by next year, that's soon, the division of labour will almost be directly equally split between jobs done by machines and jobs done by us as humans. So, Alain, let's start with someone at the coalface of recruitment. What are the changes that you see coming down the line, and what are the jobs that will be disappearing, and what are the new ones that we'll be preparing for?
So we can say that big change are always taking time. So it won't be a kind of brutal disruption, but we see that every day, every week, every month, thanks to technology, jobs are amplified, not only disrupted, but many are amplified thanks to technology. And what we can say is that first of all, this amplification is mainly taken place in all the jobs which are highly repetitive, so that machine can take over. Also in all kind of jobs which are not embedding a lot of creativity, emotional empathy, and so on. And by the way, if you look at the last 10 years statistics regarding unemployment, you see that the low-skilled jobs are not really disappearing. They are staying stable. You see also that the higher skilled jobs are increasing, but the most impacted type of jobs are the so-called medium-skilled jobs. That's the one being potentially disrupted going forward, mainly through artificial intelligence. Not really robotics, automation, it has already taken place, but mainly artificial intelligence.
Thank you. So, Minister Falasi, what steps are you, as a government minister, taking to ensure that your population is prepared, workforce is prepared for these changes?
Yes. So first of all, thank you for having me. I think this is a very, very interesting topic. When it comes to government, I'm on the higher education side, so we're closest to the labor market. Our graduates get a job, so we see there's always a gap that exists in all countries. But now we're talking about a gap not between what the education output is today, but a gap about future jobs. So for example, there's a very famous study by Oxford Martin Business School that says 47% of jobs in the US will disappear. And the World Economic Forum also predicted that around a third of students in primary studying today, once they graduate from high school, from university, they'll join jobs that are completely new. So as government, you're dealing with jobs lost and new jobs coming over. How do you train and how do you educate yourself? I think that's the biggest challenge, is to really understand that. And we gave it a lot of thought. We realized that we need to treat this in a segmented manner. So we looked into our segments as three. We have the students, and here I'm talking about schools and universities. how can we embed social skills along technical skills. The second segment is what we refer to as recent graduates, so people who've graduated from university for the past 15 years. You would assume that these graduates have acquired the social skills required, but then they might become out of date. So they would need to go back to university, and the intent is to pass a bill that asks universities to keep their online platforms available to all alumni. So it's almost like university for life. So you maintain that connection when it comes to hard skill to the university. Now, the third segment is a tricky one, which is the seasoned employees. This is the segment where you need to really upskill. That's somebody who's been doing the same job for a long time, and then that job either fundamentally changes or gets completely displaced, and you have to retool or reskill them. So the first part was really to identify the different segments because you deal with them differently. And then the second biggest question is who takes responsibility? Is it the government? Is it the universities? Is it the private sector? Is it the individual? And we soon came to realize that the fundamental or the main success factor for all of this is the personal decision to become a lifelong learner. It's a cultural shift. When you're in a country like the UAE, we're blessed with resources. There's a tendency to have a sense of not obligation, entitlement. So somebody might assume that the government would take care of him or her and train them. We want to change that. So the first thing we did was we created a nationwide campaign that promotes continuous learning, that makes it a habit, and we're telling people once you graduate from university, it's not the end, it's actually the beginning of a lifelong journey. And we also portrayed a lot of images of, an example we gave was a guy called Ahmad. There's no preference there. I think he was about 67 years old. He retired, but then he took another job and he retained himself. So we're portraying images of different segments just to explain to people that, look, it's not only for young people or middle segment, it's across the board. So I'm trying to summarize a year's work in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. So continuous learning, taking responsibility, cultural shift. How, Prime Minister, does that chime with what you're doing in Georgia and how you're seeing things there?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Well, we are trying to be sure that Georgia will be ready for the big changes because big changes will eventually happen, and I believe so. Well, human capital development is a major priority of my government, so our vision is to make Georgia an international hub for the international business and for the innovation. So recently we have adopted the new legislation according to which we will dedicate 6% of GDP, which is 25% of our budget, to education. Generally, the education sector reform and fundamental changes in education is a kind of a tricky thing for any government because it delivers a result after 10 or 15 years. So, and basically to ensure the sustainability of this policy, so we made it as a part of our legislation. So that means that any future government will also have the obligation to invest at least 6% of GDP in education. So at the same time, we have identified the professions that our national economy will need in the next 10 years, and simultaneously we have identified the professions which will be in demand in the global economy in coming years. So basically we are preparing our workforce to be as competitive as possible on a global market.
Thank you. So, Jahanzaib, you're working on a startup where using AI to effectively eliminate bias in the recruitment process. What does that bring to the party, and what does that mean in terms of diversity and so forth for the future workforce?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you again for providing me the opportunity to be here. And as we're seeing organizations evolving and transitioning to the era of automation, there's a huge component in diminishing bias and assessing foundational human skills. As you can see, like there's a report even put out by the World Economic Forum, and we're seeing the same thing in Canada. Is that some of the skills that the countries are looking for now are such as empathy, such as like creativity, collaboration, a growth mindset, a strategic thinker. So what we have done is that we're helping Fortune 500s, such as IBM, actually assess these future-proof soft skills and really keep their talent extremely competitive, because there's a huge fear, that like, folks are going to be out of work, but it's, as an organization, they can actually like provide the employees a lot of mobility by helping them with these foundational human skills that would be, allow them to outcompete computers then.
Mm-hmm. Right, thank you. So Anita, future-proofing soft skills, how does that actually gel, and can we actually do that? Can we change the mindset of a generation? And as the Prime Minister points out, this isn't something that's going to happen tomorrow or even next year. We're talking a 10-year process.
That's true. I mean, change always takes time, but I'm really encouraged to hear leaders recognizing the value of this. We've already heard about some research. There have been other economic reports that have come out that have shown that the proportion of jobs in the economy that require quantitative skills only are going down. The proportion that requires social skills are going up. The wages that you can earn for jobs that are intensive in terms of social skills are increasing. And so it's really something, that reflects the trend in terms of these are the things that we can't teach algorithms how to do, at least not yet. And my colleagues who do this work are saying it's going to be quite a ways into the future before we're going to be able to rely on technology for this. So it absolutely needs to be a focus. I know simultaneously some of the trends we see with young people and how they're spending their time may not be preparing them to interact in an increasingly diverse workplace. And we know that in my work in collective intelligence, that social skills and the ability to work with a diverse group are key to creating collectively intelligent teams and organizations. They're the things that most commonly predict collective intelligence and performance. I think another place, though, in thinking about upskilling the workforce, really is thinking about how to integrate technology into that process. I don't think education makes enough use of some of the technologies we have available. So, for example, at Carnegie Mellon, we were one of the innovators of cognitive tutors, which are automated AI-based technology tools that can help, initially designed to help students learn math and writing. We're even doing experiments now in teaching people social skills, conflict management skills, using some of these same tutors that pick up on what the student is doing, provide guidance and support and feedback and iterative practice, which is what's needed to learn any of these skills. And so I think another place to really be focusing is not only on how technology is going to disrupt the jobs people are doing, but also how technology can help us solve the problem.
I think that's quite interesting. Has any of the panelists got other ways in which technology can actually be employed to help? Because at first it sounds almost ironic using technology to teach social skills, but any other examples? Maybe Jahanzaib, you want to go in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, the other like large component with any sort of like technology, and especially with machine learning, is bias. Mm-hmm. We know that like bias exists out there algorithmically, and in the case of there's a large American organization that was unfortunately utilizing historical models to train their algorithms, which was weeding out women in the workforce. So we need to be very cognizant of how we're training our data sets, how diverse is our engineering team. A couple of years ago at MIT, there was this one PhD student where her face could not be analyzed by the facial recognition technology, and she had to wear a white mask, just to be seen. So we need to be very cognizant of how we're training and how we're actually utilizing AI for the good. So for example, in our case, with our technology, we've been able to help increase racial and gender diversity within the workforce. So when folks were like previously being overlooked because of some sort of unconscious biases, we've trained our technology for the good to actually help with that process.
The other thing I'm wondering is, are there specifics, particularly now that we're talking about social skills, are there particular people that are going to be better than others, and are we going to see a new kind of bias emerging? Don't know, Anita, do you have thoughts on that?
Absolutely, yes. So there are, a number of studies showing that there is an inherent ability to pick up on, especially on subtle nonverbal cues and interpret what others are thinking or feeling, or how they're likely to react to something. And so people kind of start at a certain point, but there's also some data to suggest that with, again, exposure, with feedback, with practice, that people can get better. You might not be able to take somebody who is terrible at it and make them great, but they can certainly get better, and they can learn strategies for how to operate in the workplace and to work with the people around them, even if they're not very good at this naturally. So it's definitely something that some focus and some resources could help.
Prime Minister, do you have thoughts on this? I mean, you're obviously putting a big chunk of GDP now into education, but how are you going to go about teaching some of these skills?
When it comes to the so-called social skills, I totally agree with the colleagues that it should be one of the biggest priority of any education system, and with a major focus on skills related to empathy, to the strategic thinking. I would say that this should be a very big priority, as well as creativity and communication skills. So Georgia, as you know, is a former Soviet country, and our education system had this legacy to be mostly focused on so-called hard skills. Yeah, so therefore, in our reform, we will be making a major focus on developing the so-called social skills as well. Of course, I mean, that's a part of DNA of any our citizen, because Georgians are generally very social, and it's one of the most hospitable countries. But of course, I think that generally we, as a government, we should also make this as a major priority of our education sector reform.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Yes,
thank you. So I have a personal view on this, on the use of technology when it comes to future-proofing students. We talked a lot about the social skills and how can you utilize technology to do that. But from my perspective, I think there's a huge potential to fully utilize technology to teach the actual hard skills. Because I think that the soft skills are the social skills are very social, they're very human. We need to free up teachers to really embed these social skills. So if you look at technology today and the way it has been utilized in education, we're only scratching the surface. So in the beginning, it was just digitization of content. Then there was access. People who would not otherwise not be able to get access to formal education are now able to go through that through MOOCs available online. I think that the second stage thereafter was the paced learning. So if I'm a fast-paced learner in maths, I could learn at my own pace. And if somebody is slow, they learn at their own pace. What we're really missing right now is for technology to understand how each individual learns. I have twins, boy and a girl, and they learn completely differently. Haya, she's very visual. Muhammad follows instructions, and he likes repetitive work. So I could teach the same topic to her by visual cues, either a video or drawing to her. And for Muhammad, it's mostly instruction and repetition. But technology did not get there yet to develop these algorithms that understand how does Ahmad learn and then deliver that content in that way. That, to me, is productivity in education, which is, we talk about productivity in service, but we don't see it yet in education. Once we do that, once we're able to develop tools that can effectively teach students, you automatically free up the teacher to focus on the social skills. I think that combination would really help our students be well prepared for the future.
And how much is that being done? I mean, it seems at the moment that in teaching certainly in a lot of countries, we just swing one way or the other. So, for example, last year, a few years back, there was a big thing to get more girls, schoolgirls, into STEM, and it just went woof that way, and not really thinking, well, is that right or whatever. How much is it just a tendency, not necessarily even of governments, but just people anyway, to take one thing and just whoosh over to that rather than to think, well, actually, let's do it? Have anyone got thoughts on that?
Well, certainly there is a bandwagon, right? And so I don't think any of us intend to create a social skills bandwagon, that then takes off and leaves math behind. The idea is that we need to do all of it. But just to build on the minister's last point about the technology, I think this is where we need to build some better bridges between the technologists and the policymakers, because there definitely is that technology to customize learning. The cognitive tutors I mentioned that we've worked on at my university can certainly help with that. There are other technologies out there, and I completely wholeheartedly agree that trying to leverage those to then free up teachers to do the things that they can uniquely do with students is an absolutely good path to be moving along.
Just to build on that great argument, so according to the recent research, so the importance of so-called informal education in a human capital development process will increase year after year. And therefore, I think it will have also a very big upside in terms of being more focused on creating and developing the social skills. And therefore, the informal education will enable policymakers to customize the education process and therefore get the better results.
Right.
Some thought. I think we are discussing here about early education, which is good, and how technology has to impact the way we are educating the younger generation. My worry and somehow my statement is about probably the 370 million people which are at risk because they have not more the capabilities needed to perform their jobs. And here my message is, it's not about lifelong talking, it is about lifelong learning. Because everybody speaks about this change, the impact of the technology, but when I'm looking and I'm discussing, fortunately there are governments doing something, but the majority of the countries and the governments are not really doing anything about that. When you speak with the business and companies, not many business have their action plan ready. And when you speak with staff, with employees, a lot of them are not conscious that they should act on their attractiveness, on their own competitiveness. And I think it is important that both these three stakeholders, being government, being the business employers and the staff, are really now taking action regarding upskilling and reskilling. And they are best practices in the world. We discussed this morning Singapore. Georgia could be one of the best examples. I'm sure that it will be followed by the UAE. But there are best practices from governments taking radical actions, first of all, by defining their strategy. Because being a government or being a business, it is important to know where do you want to go with your country, with your business, and based on your strategy, to design your talent or your people strategy, including the reskilling and the upskilling. And so, on my side, if I would have to give a call for action today is, please, let's design this plan, because it is important if we want a society and the next generation having a better life than we had on our side.
How far up the line do you go? I mean, the Minister was talking about sort of lifelong education and a 15-year graduate going on. I mean, how far up should we be taking this? People are going to live to 100. Should we, the upskilling, where do we draw the line, or how far do we go?
We are fan on our side from what we call the vocational training, which start at 15. You have the basic education, but we have seen in the world that the countries having deployed the vocational training, the apprenticeship model since many decades, are the ones with the lowest youth unemployment. If you take, there is the so-called black rule, almost every country in the world have a youth unemployment rate which is double than their regular average unemployment in their country. There are a few exceptions in the world. One is Germany, the other one is Switzerland, the third one in Austria. And the explanation behind this is that these countries have deployed this vocational training. Now you can ask yourself, yeah, but what is the recipe behind this point? The recipe, and it's not only for early education but also for later, is that there is a permanent alignment between what the business needs, what the country needs, and what the education system is providing. And by having this communication, this dialogue platform, you adjust permanently the supply and the demand. And you see that in the majority of the countries, education is working in silo, government is working in silo, business is working in silo, and you come to a situation where, unfortunately, the system, the education system, is producing a lot of young people with the wrong education.
Prime Minister, do you?
I totally agree with the statement, and I think that you mentioned this magic recipe, yes, and moreover, I would like to go even further, that the magic recipe behind the economic success of Germany, Switzerland, and Austria actually is the vocational education and then the very strong link between the business and the policymakers when it comes to education, and I think that's the right way to go. So the education, so the policymakers, so they should design the education system in a way that it will be bottom up, not top down, because it's a private business and private sector who has this intuition. I mean, what type of skills the workforce will need for the national economy and also for the global economy as well. So I totally agree with the statement.
Minister, do you have some?
Yes, I think spot on. We talked about this earlier today, and I think one of the reasons why we are here is to work between public and private. So we signed up for the Closing the Skill Gap Accelerator. So we'll be building a council in the UAE, which has two ministers, education and labor, but it also has a representation from the private sector, and we will be working with 50 to 100 private sector companies, and they'll be representing the economy. So in our case, aviation, probably industry and oil and gas and so forth. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. There needs to be a closer cohesion. I think the World Economic Forum is a great platform to do that. But going back to Alain's point around reskilling and why do governments or why do companies don't really work, one of the things we discussed earlier today was people or companies usually think that it's much easier to fire somebody and hire somebody who's skilled. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, ABB did a study, and they realized the cost to replace an employee is about $100,000, but the cost to retrain an existing employee is $30,000. So selling that now makes it easier. Now, that's one side. There are numerous studies. I think the more we get of those numbers to convince companies, because the immediate action is just to replace, right? Yeah. So once we put figures around it, it makes it easier to convince the private sector to also invest in reskilling. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so what we're seeing in Canada at the moment is that there's been a huge focus on identifying that skills gap. And so we had the opportunity to work with the government of Canada and with LinkedIn and with Civic Action to actually figure out what are some of these gaps. So what has come out from the report is that there's a huge emphasis for micro-learning services. So now the government, what they're doing is they're actually giving employees time off, every couple of years for them to go and actually upskill, because if employees do not have some of these social skills, and in the future how things are going, it's going to be very difficult for them to mobilize and change job roles, and that's going to affect the economy. So there's a huge focus on actually helping them subsidize and incentivize for existing employees to upskill through like micro-learning programs now.
Does that rely on subsidies, or does it mean that it's something that big companies can do and small companies can't?
So you know, in Canada, it's very like, you know, we're very fortunate. Obviously, we have a good tax system, I guess, but a lot of this is coming from the government's pocket, and then obviously there are some like corporate sponsors as well.
I take the opportunity to perhaps to give 3 ideas. I think that everybody or the different stakeholders should take their burden. And we have published a document called Rethinking Workforce Investment. And we give three ideas, 3 suggestions. First is to treat in the bookkeeping, in the accounting system, the investment or the training investment and the reskilling spending as an investment rather than as a cost. So allowing companies to, let's say, distribute, amortize the burden on different years. That's the first recommendation to government. The second is to treat fiscally in a differentiated way layoff cost from upskilling and reskilling cost. Again, to provide a financial incentive to companies to really look at reskilling rather than take the problem, give the problem also financially to the society or the government, and then and solve your problem on your micro way. By having a differentiated tax, you allow that you give these financial incentives to the people. And the third proposal is to create what, for example, Singapore has done, but also France. It's a so-called personal, portable, individual training account. Why individual and why portable? Because we see that the young generation are mainly freelancers. 47% of the fresh or the new graduates in the US are entering the labor market as freelancers. And a lot of them, or on average, they will change 11 times from jobs between the age of 18 and 25. How do you cope with your social protection system and so on? I think it's another debate, but it means that more and more your protection system should be individualized and portable so that you as individual can take this account from one company to the others, from one jobs to the others. So individual, portable, and training account, because we know that today it is proven that you are losing 30% of your skills and competencies after an average of period of 4 years. So it means after 10 years, you're obsolete on the skill side. So you need to anticipate and prepare yourself to this situation. And by saving money, saving money, so you can plan your reskilling, your upskilling, to stay competitive, to remain attractive in the labor market, not only in the labor market, but I look at or chief of government here, and as a country, it is very important that your country is staying very competitive and attractive.
Just one last thing, I think, before we open it to the audience. How much do we actually know? I mean, we've talked about quite a lot of things, social skills, upskilling, skills becoming obsolete. How much do we really actually, as we sit here, know what the workforce is going to look like in even 5 or 10 years? Yeah, you're taking that one first. Good.
Let me make a comparison. So in the UAE, we're predominantly hydrocarbon-based, and predicting oil prices is a way of life. I found that predicting jobs is far more difficult than predicting oil. So even if you look at a report that was published by UF that said the 10 jobs that never existed 10 years ago, it sounds scary, but if you look at them, for example, one of them is Uber driver. How different is that from a cab driver? It's the same basic skill, but modified. So an Uber driver has 2 additional skills. One is technologically savvy. He or she would be able to, use their mobile device and so forth. And secondly, customer service, because he or she would be rated again well, but a cab driver would not be. So sometimes we exaggerate when we say a totally new job, but you look at it as a combination of jobs, like a YouTube content provider. That's a mixture of skills. So I think that's what we decided in the UAE to focus on the skills, not the jobs. So we're moving away from predicting jobs of the future, and we're trying to focus more on skills, and it's a combination of hard skills as well as social skills. Granted, we need to look at the jobs being automated today, but for future predictions, we don't go that far. We just focus on the skills required.
Anyone else got thoughts on this before we open up?
No, what I can say is that whatever the level of skills requested, you need to amplify them, you need to upskill yourself. We have people doing very simple jobs, taking care of this, for example, this bike, e-bike in the cities and so on. And all customers, famous brands, they are asking people to swap batteries and so on. But even for these people, which have a very easy task, we request some kind of ability to work with reporting system in the phone or the mobile phone and so on, because everything today is geolocalized, is reported online and so on and so on. So even for the most simple jobs, technology is coming in.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to just like touch up on the fact that, you know, like a lot of the CHROs that we would interact with now is that there's, you know, a lot of the workforce has that fear and they have that anxiety. And the best way is to actually, you know, enlist them as partners, you know, enlist them as partners and really let them know like what's going on, help them understand that, hey, like some of the jobs might not be there, but here are the tools for you to upskill yourself, and these skills are gonna allow you like mobility, whether it's within that organization or within any other company in the world.
Right. Okay, we've had really good talk. I'm sure members of the audience would have some questions. So if you would like to raise a hand and identify, perhaps this gentleman in the middle. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for the insightful comments. It's for you, Minister Al-Falasi, and for you, Mr. Dehaze. You both mentioned similar things, one about entitlement and one about incentivizing employees, etc. One of the challenges we have, so we call it scaled learning. That's essentially what you are talking about. How do you incentivize somebody to actually change direction in what they are doing? Because it's down to the individual. So we've got a scaled learning program at our organization. We only have about a 35% take-up of individuals actually wanting to change and to improve themselves for the next step or for the changes that we see. We have mainframe experts, for example, who's been there 30, 40 years. We're trying to upskill them so that they can be current and they can continue down for a new, or provide for themselves and their families. So they are incentivized for themselves naturally to learn new things. But there are those that just simply won't want to change. What's your advice, what's your strategies to bring those type of individuals through the journey to learn new things?
I can start with the answer. I think it's the best way to tackle this is to have a multi-stakeholder strategy or action. I think it is important, first of all, to communicate about the need to change, about the impact of technology, about the industry, about the country, about everything. Second, as an employer, it is also very important somehow to work on the sustainability of your activities to make sure you have the talent you need today, but also the talent you need tomorrow. So you need to develop your people in order to remain competitive in the future, and so invest in the employability. And third, also the staff, employees. The personal account is a way also to sensibilize or provide sensibility to the people. I don't know in good English, but you will understand me. So that the people are aware they should take care of themselves regarding remaining competitive on the labor market. And by combining the three actions, that's how you solve that kind of issue and challenge.
If I can follow up on that. I think, look, it's a very difficult question to tackle, but I think at the heart of it is a cultural shift. So we are used to going to school, going to university, ending our education. When we go to work, we do training. Sometimes we're forced to do it, right? So we're not in the habit of looking at ourselves as a portfolio of skills that needs to be constantly evolved. And that's why when we presented the strategy to the cabinet, the number one priority was to work extensively on the campaign. We've identified 12 skills, and we're doing a skill every month just to get that momentum going on. So at the heart of it is a cultural shift. Whether it's at a corporate level or a country level, people need to understand that they own their own future. They have to invest in themselves. I don't have a magic answer to it, but I think it needs to start from school, the way you teach. For the new generation, for the existing ones, it's a difficult one to do because they tend to be reactive. People who are doing their job for a long time are used to a certain pattern. So they'll only be reacting out of fear. We want to move from looking at this as a threat to moving to it as an opportunity. How can I, Ahmad, be up to date? How can I constantly evolve myself? How can I retrain myself? Even if it's not something that will protect me from a job, but even continuous skilling. That's, I think, the mindset that we need to look into, from a threat to an opportunity.
So, thank you. And just to add to that, onto that comment, I mean, for the younger generation, I think it's easier for them to upskill because that's how they were born into this technological world. But that's why I liked your example of the 67-year-old that retired, retrained himself, and then went back into the working environment. But most of the other older generation don't want to reskill. Everything for them in the world is black and white. So it's also taking that shift in our environment as well, specifically for the bank, moving our older generation, those close to retirement, to try and reskill and retrain themselves.
Thank you. Have we got some other questions over the back there and then to the front? A gentleman at the back on that side.
Yeah, hi. You just touched on this, but I'd be curious to understand your recommendation for people above 50 in the workforce and how you reskill and upskill them, because we tend to be accepting that beyond a certain age, reskilling, upskilling there's not going to be an ROI, but equally we all have in our workforce people above a certain threshold who are going to be working for another 10, 15 years. So I'd be curious to understand how what you recommend and how you see that particular aspect of things. Thanks.
Take it? Okay. Just two remarks. So, first of all, yes, it's a cultural shift, and for cultural shift, you have really to communicate towards all the populations. Now, at the end of the day, eventually some people will have to leave their job because their job is completely displaced. So it can happen. But then it is very important also as an employer and as a government to organize the transition and eventually reskill these people so that they can be further employable in another industry, because some of the skills can be applied in different industries, and with just a little bit of reskilling, they can be put at work in more simple or usable companies and jobs. This is what I would say.
And if I might build on that, just to reinforce this idea that there is going to need to be a role for government to play, because the other trend that we haven't talked about yet is just the trend toward not having as many organizations, right? Increasingly we have platforms that are using contractors to do work, and so while large organizations have played a big role in upskilling our adult workforce in the past, now people are going to be, independent contractors who have to find their own opportunities. And so I think, again, that I just reinforce this notion that this is where, we're going to have some policy and government involvement in order to keep the whole workforce competitive.
So you mentioned government. I think one of the best government examples is, as we said, Singapore, right? So Singapore, for example, when it comes to your question about the older employees, they devised a system where they actually, I hate using the word, but subsidize the reskilling of these employees and even pay partially the salary, because they know, even from a social perspective, they're better off remaining on the job rather than being retired. So that has been done, and it's been, I think, done for a brief period to test it out. So from that perspective, to Alain's point, naturally, if you're not used to continuous education or to lifelong learning, you'd only do it when you're cornered. And that's when the government could intervene to help companies keep that individual and retrain them. Another example, when you talk about the broader perspective, the bulk, the huge population, those who are freelancers maybe, also there's a good example in Singapore. They used to issue a $500 credit where anybody can take any course that they want to do. Now that has recently fired back because there was a lot of supply of private courses available, which was not at the quality expected. So now Singapore is thinking now to take that back maybe and readdress it. So these are the kind of lessons that we're trying to learn from different governments and different companies, but there's no magical solution. It's a new topic, and we're all trying different ways to address it. But as Alain said as well, I think at the heart of it is a cultural change. Until then, government, private sector, we all have to work together to solve it.
Thank you. Perhaps the lady in the front.
Hi, my name is Solveig Hieronymus. I'm a partner with McKinsey, and I work quite a bit on the field of skills and reskilling and the topics of future of work. And I do have a follow-up to Alain over there on the investment notion, which I very much share. I think it needs to be taken from an investment lens. But when you take an investor's mindset, the question is, what's the payback and what does actually performance look like? So what we see quite a bit is a pretty prolific, pretty growing industry around skills and skill building. Companies are now aware, governments are aware, budgets are actually going that way. And we have a headline understanding of skills we want: human-centric skills, empathy, creativity, digital skills, we've heard all of that. But once people actually have spent the training budget and there was actually activities or people touched in being skilled on those areas, how do you measure what does good look like? So do they actually have the skills? So what's the ROI, the second level question behind the budget spent? And then what do you need to define, at least broadly, for that actually be effective so you can steer a system and actually really drive towards the result?
I would say for me the key metric is at the end the unemployment figure and the youth unemployment. I know it's very high level, but you see that the very competitive countries in the world have a very low unemployment figure, average, and a very low youth unemployment figure. I've quoted Germany, Switzerland, Austria, but also Singapore is another one. And by the way, very interesting, everybody speaks about Asia as a low unemployment figure and so on. If you look into the details, you will see that the youth unemployment figures are increasing in Asia year after year. So they are just below the global average. The global average is at 12.5%. And in Asia, we are already at 10.5% youth unemployment. So there also it is increasing, and there also there is time to act.
How to measure actually is a very important question for the policymakers as well, because when you are investing such a big amount from the budget, you need somehow some objective criteria to measure the success. Well, in Georgia, we are very proud that we are number 6 in terms of doing business. And therefore, we have the following benchmark. So, World Bank is conducting every year the so-called Human Capital Index. And basically, what is our goal in 10 years to be in the top 5 countries in the Human Capital Index. So, I think that's an objective criteria on the national level.
Do we have any other gentlemen over in the front here?
Hello.
It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dani. I'm from Turkey. Thank you for the great panel. My question actually more close to the company side. I work in a startup. We provide HR tech services for development. We are democratizing the coaching services. And when we talk with the HR professionals, they are aware of the reskilling urgency. At the same time, their main problem with mobilizing the company is the rest of the management level, who are resisting somehow to change, and they are not laying enough actionable strategies for the future skills which is necessary to their job. So HR cannot plan the much more valuable strategy for the reskilling. So it all comes back to known issues like soft skills. And I believe there is a lacking of information about how to utilize the data. You said that we are moving away from the quantifiable version and technical part of the skills, but at the same time, new business requires a higher level of understanding of quantifiable data in order to act more empathetically, to utilize your social skills combined with the quantitative skills. So my question is, how HR can overcome that resistance within the company, and what are the possible actions for them?
I will be a little bit provocative, but sometimes I don't know if HR is part of the problem or part of the solution. What does it mean? It means that in a lot of cases, when you meet the HR, CHRO of companies, yeah, they know that there is a need of reskilling, but they don't have really a detailed understanding what will change in their company. They don't need exactly how to cope with this. And sometimes it's also a question of generation, because these positions are also taken by older people, not really, let's say, savvy in new technology, in the new business model and so on. And it is very, very difficult for them to envision the future. And with this, they know, yeah, we have to change, but what to do to change? So that's why I say, are they part of the problem of the solutions? Point one. Second, also employees. Are they part of the problem or the solutions? We made a survey in Europe regarding the sense of responsibility, regarding the need for reskilling and upskilling. And it is very cultural. The more south you go, the more the staff is saying, oh, that's the responsibility of the company, that's the responsibility of the state. And the more north you go, the more employees are saying, no, it is my responsibility to really remain competitive, to remain skilled so that I remain attractive in the labor market. So again, you have to work on different levers, again, multi-stakeholder solution.
There's also, I think, an important role for data analytics in a lot of this, right? So the HR function needs to really incorporate more of that, you know, as in order to really demonstrate, you know, where things are moving. And then you can absolutely assess where employees are. We have very good technology for assessing what skills employees have and identifying where they need to move. And so the tools are definitely there, both to you know, identify what's needed and also figure out where the company needs to move. And so it's really a matter of pulling in, you know, the data analytics to support and predict what's necessary.
And I just wanted to add to that, you know, from a fellow startup selling to large enterprises, you know, a lot of the component, you know, also like comes down to like transformation. So a lot of organizations, they go through a stage of fear to education and then finally embracing that like technology. So like we went through the same thing, and it's that, what is your communication like? What is your champions like communication like within the organization? Are they really educating them as to what is going to happen in the next couple of years? Because like what we've like realized is that with that amount of education, it's really helped us to move that needle. and you know, get an organization such as like, you know, large, like a technology company to embrace our technology. So it's
Great, thank you. Sadly, I think we're going to have to stop the questions there, but I'd like to invite each of the panel to come up with a brief but one parting thought that our audience should give them food for thought as they walk away. Prime Minister, do you want to kick off with a must-have thought for them to leave with?
Well, I mean, in my opinion, the life itself is a learning process, so I wouldn't divide it, would not have the thresholds. I think the fourth industrial revolution, and one of the biggest upside it will have, that it will create the upside for everybody, for any generation. So, and therefore, life is a learning process itself, so we should look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to, for the rest of you, if you can restrict it to no more than a dozen words, is the challenge.
A dozen words.
A dozen.
Trying to count. I think my message is just be curious. I think I want anybody within their job to think, how is their job being changed, assess their skills, and just go try anything out online. Just be curious. Take the first step to try and do it out of opportunity rather than risk. More than 12 hours, but close.
A bit over.
I was going to say, you know, that's a great point. Like 3 years ago, I would have like never imagined of being here, but just having a growth mindset and just being like flexible and that continuous learning ability goes a very long way.
I'd say embrace technology as part of the solution as well as part of the problem or the fear.
Thanks.
On my side, call to action. Whatever, if you are a government or policymaker, responsible for business, or you are in charge of yourself, go out of this room or switch the screen if you are following us by stream, and design your upskilling and reskilling plan. And by the way, we are entering in the budget season, so that's the perfect time to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And I'd like to now invite Sadia to come and talk to us about what we can take from this and put it on the agenda. Thank you. Sorry?
Thank you. Sorry about that little technical glitch. Thank you very much to you, and thank you to the panel. I was asked just to sum up a little bit about how the World Economic Forum will carry forward some of the discussion that has happened. We are trying to drive forward systems change when it comes to the area of talent and skills, and try to provide a platform for that type of systems change. So there are 3 key areas where we will be working. One is very much related to what you brought up around HR. So if we look at the concept of HR 4.0, how do we actually ensure that CEOs, CTOs, CFOs, and CHROs are all taking collective responsibility for this new vision of talent? And we'll be providing a platform for companies to do that. Second, at an industry level, there's a lot to be gained by getting different companies within an industry to work together on developing the talent pipeline and on doing some of the reskilling and upskilling. That will help a lot more workers than if companies work alone. So we continue to provide a platform for that. We're currently working with 7 industries at the forum, and we'll expand that to all 20. And then finally, at a country level, there is a lot to be done in bringing the largest employers together with ministries of labor, industry, and education, and have them work together. And we're delighted that here at the summit, the UAE became one of the founding countries that is leading this movement, and will continue to expand to about 15 economies to start with. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we've had a really good discussion. I think there's quite a lot of takeaways, and as Sadia is mentioning, one of the big ones, seems to me, is working together, not being in silos. So we have public and private sector working together, and lifelong learning. I think it's not even just after graduation or after 15 years. It's like Alain's 67-year-old, I think, is the man that we should be remembering as we leave today. And also, again, as the panelists say, important things is to be curious and to be flexible. So I'd like to thank my panelists and thank you all for being in the audience today. Thank you.
Thank you.